America, as a country, has been less literate and less sophisticated than it ever has been before. This is because we have forgotten our own language and our own heritage. As a Western nation, we as a people look up to the great civilizations of Rome and Greece as generators of great culture which we have emulated for the last 2,000 years. America used to teach the classical languages of the ancient Greek, once spoken by the Athenians, known as Attic Greek, and of the Romans, known as Classical Latin. While the languages of Greek and Latin are still spoken and written in somewhat familiar forms today, such as in modern Greek or ecclesiastical Latin, these languages either have modifications to them which make the old language illegible, such as in the case of modern Greek with Attic Greek, or they are used for explicitly religious purposes, such as ecclesiastical Latin is for the modern Roman Catholic Church, and even then they are beginning to stray away from it. Both Attic Greek and Classical Latin used to be taught within the American school system and produced tremendous results. A more literate people, with the average American today having a reading level less than that of a 6th grader, compared to that of an 8th grader or a 9th grader around the 1950s. This shift can be noted because this is also around the time in which Greek and Latin had become de-emphasized in a lot of our public school education, and in exchange, modern conversational languages with more immediate practical purposes, such as German, French, or Spanish, began to take over the school system. While many can blame a lot of modern technology for this literacy crisis, however, a lot of it also comes from our school system's intentional shift from these languages of ancient Greek and Latin, which itself requires a dedicated learning process and a deconstruction of the grammar and sentence structure itself. For most of American history, be it at private institutions for the elite or public schools for the children of lower and middle class people, there had always been a deep presence of the Attic Greek and Classical Latin languages that would be studied there. It was viewed as an integral piece to the educational system for the American people, rich or poor. To understand just how big of a grasp which the Latin and Attic Greek languages had on the American people, we can just look at the cultures which developed amongst both the wealthy and the lower and middle classes of the American people during the time. The wealthy obtained most of their knowledge through the vast collections of library books which they had, many of which were filled by the leather-bound books of the Homeric epics, Plato, Cicero, Horace, and other ancient Greek and Latin philosophers, playwrights, and authors that produced the civilizational bonds which encompassed the traditions of the Western world. Their universities often had rigorous exams, which required tangible knowledge of the Attic Greek and Classical Latin languages to even attend the university, to prove that you had the capability of understanding advanced concepts within the English language. These were our educated classes, ones well versed with a deep knowledge of our history and the history of other cultures and civilizations, but yet tangibly able to form a cohesive worldview which was inspirational to others, most especially the people who would end up voting for them or their preferred candidate. Meanwhile, the middle and lower class peoples, who would end their education around 8th grade at the time, with only about 25% of people having a high school diploma in the year 1950, had Classical Latin and Attic Greek hardwired into their lives via the culture produced at the time by these same highly educated, wealthy elites. These people were able to understand the references of the Romans and the Greeks, perhaps not as well as, say, the wealthy would for sure, but they would frequently interact with them, be it through the early television which they watched, or the movies which they watched at the time. Remember, Jason of the Argonauts is a good instance. Or the newspapers, which used to contain periodicals and parts of novels which they could read and keep up with. All the language present here was sophisticated language, and it forced the minds of these people to be able to mold into someone who understood the English language better than we do today, but also better understood the situations which we live in today, through actually engaging with these issues through more complex sentence structure and grammar and wording, rather than the content slop that many people produce today, be it short 10-minute videos on the latest political outrage or reels or TikToks. No one feels genuinely challenged by these mechanisms and only serves to disengage and discourage human thought beyond what is being told to them, rather than engaging with it. This is in part due to the reduction of these classical language programs, which our education has formally reduced with full intention. To be fair to the education system that we have in place today, there was a good reason as to why the reduction in the humanities and classical languages led to it dying down. It was because in part of the Cold War. When the USSR launched Sputnik into the atmosphere in 1957, an educational panic occurred because the people in charge were fearful by their perceived lack of any serious scientific focus or any engineering focus within their schools. Thus, the United States looked to increase funding into STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And at first, they did this in conjunction with the humanities, in order to ensure civic pride and the recognition of heritage as to why we're different than the Soviet Union, along with it. While this focus is not necessarily a bad thing, as in order for society to progress, we must have the nurturing of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, it was taken to the hardest approach by the 1980s, where we essentially began to defund and devalue the humanities. And a lot of these programs designed to give the American children a sense of their culture and a sense of their history as citizens of the United States. Essentially, instead of schools being used to train American school children to be good cultured citizens, schools began to be used to train American school children to be good cogs in the modern world, forsaking their culture, which was once taught through history, the ancient languages, and philosophy. We have taken this rigid and systematic approach to academics since the 1980s, though one may argue it has been since the investment of the Rockefellers into the public school system, to where education has been devalued into essentially a less complicated and less thorough Chinese-style bureaucratic exam system. However, we don't live in the Cold War anymore. We're not fighting the Soviet Union. We live in the 21st century, where our school children don't even know what American culture is, or what even being American is by any sense of the word, either than a piece of paper. There is real no union of values, no union of culture. We have essentially been atomized rather than harmonized. One essence of grasping back this sense of being an American, that which is a uniquely Western identity, is to restore the languages of Attic Greek and Classical Latin to the curriculum. With all of the advocacy in reference to improving the cultural pride within the United States, I think it's only fair to look into the practical usages of the language as well, considering the fact that both Attic Greek and Classical Latin as languages are considered dead languages. When looking at the English language, while a lot of it is influenced by the Germanic side of it, usually based off sentence structure, grammar, and most of our frequent words, the English language is also heavily dominated in etymology, or word origin, from the Latin language. 60% of all words in the English language can trace their original words of origin to either Latin or Attic Greek, with grammatical ideas commonplace in our language such as direct objects, indirect objects, participles, and conjunctive mood, all originating from Attic Greek and Latin. For reference, take a look at the words that we find commonplace in political circles today. Conservative comes from the Latin verb conservare, which means to conserve or preserve. Liberal comes from the Latin word liber, which means free, with liberales being a term for a free man. Progressive comes from the Roman preposition or ablative pro, which means for or in front of, and the Latin verb gressus, or to step, which combines into progressus, means to step forward. Philosophy comes from the Greek word philosophia, which means love of wisdom, with philia or philo meaning love of, and sophia meaning wisdom. In more professional careers, such as law and medicine, many of the terminology comes from Latin or Greek terminology. Concepts integral to the American rule of law, such as habeas corpus or subpoena, come from Latin. Concepts integral to the medicinal world, such as many of the systems within our body, such as gastro for stomach, cardio for heart, or pneumo for lungs, are all of Greek origin. It is estimated, in fact, by linguists that around 70 to 80% of all concepts found in the foundational legal terminology which lawyers and judges use to administer the law originate in Latin, and 70 to 75% of all concepts in clinical medical terminology, which doctors use to properly take care of the human body, originate in ancient Greek. This, thus, illustrates a different story than the one painted by some today. That no, Classical Latin and Attic Greek are not dead languages at all, but they are still in use by very important professions and institutions, which, if learned to even an elementary level of understanding, can help people understand not just the world or those professions, but themselves better. The elimination of the Classical Latin and the Attic Greek programs across schools and universities have been a tragedy for the development of the citizen within the United States. What was once a language which promoted grander thinking and more complex understandings of the world has been relegated to the sideline for languages which on the surface seem to have more practical usage, but in reality share a similar sideline to which Latin and Greek do in the English-speaking world. The destruction of these classical programs would be equivalent to the likes of instituting a program for children in the schools of India to study ancient Sanskrit for centuries, to then all of a sudden take away this program and a fundamental understanding of their origins as a people. It is in a sense a robbery of the children of the United States, be it native born for centuries or the children of immigrants, to de-emphasize this program for them, as a lack of this program allows them to become less literate, less culturally aware of what they have inherited or what they've been welcomed into, and worst of all, stupider people. As someone who has greatly benefited from my study of Classical Latin and have found it helped me better understand the English language and the world on a much better level than I had before, I believe the reinstitution of Classic Latin and Attic Greek is not only a good thing, but a necessary thing for the flourishing of our people as a nation.